Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Sponsored by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Now let's explore the field of archaeology in today's episode.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. George Sparks, and this is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. We got an exciting program for you today. We got a guest, Justin Robinson, and he's going to tell us about the Byzantine coins and how they compare to the image on the Shroud of Turin. Also, I have my co-host, Dr. David Graves, PhD, 30 years, field archaeologist, lots of experience. And we also have Mr. John Mancini, CEO of the Museum of Archaeological and Biblical History here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. John is an enthusiast in coins, I'll tell you that. And also he's got a little surprise for us going on from the museum vault. He got here around 5 o'clock last night or so, and he went and got this out of the museum vault to share with us. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Let me tell you about Justin's theory. The potential evidence that the Byzantine coins have on the obverse side the image of Christ. And the image resembles that of the Shroud of Turin. Now, what does that mean? A Byzantine coin has an image similar to that of the Shroud of Turin. Well, back in 1988, there was carbon-14 testing in which they concluded that the shroud was from the medieval period, and may I say from the 14th century, possibly, CE, if what Justin is telling us is the fact. It means we can date it back at least to the 7th century, thus ignoring that 1966 carbon-14 testing. That is really important. Justin is a historian and an author. He works in the coin industry. Also, he's fellow of the Royal Numismatic Society, also a member of the British Numismatic Society. Justin is a contributor to Coin News, UK's biggest selling coin magazine. He enjoys working in the coin industry where he shares his passion for history, telling the story that brings the past to life. Justin has a saying. Wherever I see him on a podcast, this saying comes up, Justin. You know what it is. A coin without a story is just a piece of metal, but a coin with a story becomes history in your hands. Well said, sir.
Yeah, it's great.
He has also developed content for the British Society for the Turin Shroud. Now, this has a website, Shroud of Turin, one word, shroudofturin.uk, and we will put that in the content also. Right. Justin, welcome to the program. Hey, at this time, tell us a little bit about what got you into numismatics and what got you into comparing Byzantine coins with the Shroud of Turin.
Well, the interest in the Shroud of Turin came first when I was a very small boy, about 9 or 10. I remember seeing my mother reading a book, and the book had a very interesting photograph on the back. And I remember asking my mother what the book was about and what the photograph was on the back. And she told me, she said, if this book is correct, then what you're looking at there is a photograph of Christ. And I couldn't believe it. And I remember asking my mum if I could read the book after she'd finished with it, and she said yes. And it became the first grown-up book I think I'd ever read. And it was The Shroud of Turin by Ian Wilson. And I've actually got an original copy of it here. This was actually, I think my mother actually had the paperback of it, but that was the image that I saw. Sorry, that's the image that I saw. And it was incredible, absolutely incredible. So that was the first grown-up book I ever read. I then went on and I watched with my mother the documentary that was made around that time called The Silent Witness by David Rolfe. And that is absolutely fascinating, and that led me down a rabbit hole from which I've never really fully emerged. And I think what that did was inspire me with a fascination of history, which has obviously continued. I think the Shroud of Turin is an incredible artifact. It's where science and history and faith combine. in one absolutely incredible, totally unlikely object. And for that reason, I find it quite fascinating. Interestingly enough, went off to university. I studied history. I got a master's degree, and I lectured in history for a short while, and loved all of that. And then managed to have an opportunity to put my knowledge of history and fascination for history to good use. And I got involved in the coin industry, and became a historian for them. I work for a company today called Samlerhuset, one of the largest coin collecting companies in Europe. And they own, for example, the Mint of Norway, so they strike the Nobel Peace Prize each year. So I get the fun job of actually telling the stories behind the coins that the company is selling. So I'm in a very fortunate position. And a little while ago, just after I joined in the coin industry, I was presented with a Byzantine gold coin, and asked if I could write some information about that. And of course, it was fascinating because this was one of the gold solidus of Justinian II, which was the first gold coin in the Byzantine era to have Christ depicted on it. And so I was able to tell an incredible story about how Constantinople eventually acquired the Mandylion, the holy shroud, the holy cloth of Edessa, which I believe is what is now in Turin Cathedral. I couldn't afford a gold solidus; that was completely beyond my pay grade. So I had a look, and I discovered that in 969 AD, Emperor John Zimisces actually began to mass produce circulating coins that actually had the image of Christ on it. So I decided I wanted to get a couple of good examples of that for my collection. And I will never forget scrolling through a folder of coins at the World Money Fair in Berlin, and suddenly being presented with this astonishing one, which is the one you see at the top of the screen, my screen, which I'll talk to you about in a bit more detail later. And when I saw that, I could not believe the similarities between that and the Shroud of Turin. And I think the reason why these Byzantine coins are so special, as you've alluded to, is because if the engravers actually saw what we call today the Shroud of Turin, then the Shroud of Turin cannot be a late medieval fake. It had to have been in Constantinople in the 10th century, and if it was in Constantinople then it was the Mandylion, and we actually have as said, that we can trace the history of the Mandylion of Edessa all the way back to the 1st century. So certainly it becomes a compelling case for authenticity of the shroud itself. So yes, so it's a fascinating study.
Well, at this time, if you want to set up your PowerPoint.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Well, this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but the hypothesis there, the Byzantine bronze coins struck in Constantinople in the 10th and 11th centuries provide a compelling case for the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin. As I said, the Shroud of Turin, currently in Turin Cathedral, is, I think, one of the most incredible objects of the world. There's an image of it. It displays basically the unmistakable full body image, front and back, of a man who bears wounds associated with a Roman scourging and crucifixion. The cloth is believed to be the most scientifically studied object in the world, and yet each study inevitably raises more questions than it answers. After decades of study, scientists are still unable to replicate the image, even with 21st century technology. No one knows for certain how the image has got itself onto the cloth. We've been able to rule out many things. It's not a painting. It's not a rubbing or anything like that. There doesn't appear to have any sort of chemical properties to the image. It is well, a mystery. The closest that we've got to being able to replicate the image is with a burst of ultraviolet light, which slightly discolors the fabric in the way that the image has been formed here on the cloth. We still do not have the technology to replicate a full body image, even with 21st century technology, which I think is quite fascinating. As you can see, the cloth itself measures 14 foot by 5 inches by 4.4 meters, which works itself out into the old system of cubits. It's an 8 by 2 cubits. So this was a measurement which certainly would have been familiar in the 1st century. The reason why the shroud has attracted the interest it has, of course, is because of the image that appears on it. It wasn't actually photographed until the last days of the 19th century, and we had they had an Italian amateur photographer called Secondo Pia, who was actually allowed to photograph it for the first time at the end of a public exposition. And there's a wonderful story of how when Secondo Pia actually took a photograph, he only photographed the face initially, and he took it back to his darkroom, and the shroud was put away for another generation. And when he actually took a photo, the negative, when the negative was developed, he was so shocked with what he saw, he nearly dropped the plate because he realized for the first time that the image was actually more pronounced as a photographic negative. You could actually see more detail than you could ever see as a positive. And that was in 1898. And of course, it was that really kick-started the huge amount of interest around the world in the shroud. Very sadly, poor Secondo Pia was accused of faking his photograph, and he had to wait until the next public exposition of the shroud some 30-40 years later in order to be vindicated, which was rather unfair for him. But I think people were just absolutely astonished by how much clearer it was to actually observe the image as a photographic negative, which you can see sort of on my screen now. You can see basically the results of severe blood flow across the body, consistent with a Roman scourging. You can see the marks on the head, obviously, which marry up to what the Bible describes as the crown of thorns. We can see sort of heavy lacerations across the head. You can see a major wound in the side, consistent with a lance having pierced the chest cavity. You can see blood and water stains which are pooled around the small of the back. You can see evidence of a brutal flogging, resulting in 120 wounds consistent with having been inflicted by a multi-pronged Roman flagrum. And they've actually been able to take Roman flagrums, the artifacts, and actually overlay them over a life-size image of the shroud, and to see that the wounds actually match up with astonishing accuracy. We can see blood flow at both arms from wounds inflicted in the wrists, which are consistent with both arms being suspended above the head in a crucifixion position. It is even possible to calculate the last position that the hands were in at the moment of death, which is, again, just an astonishing level of detail. There's wounds on the wrist consistent with crucifixion. And that's very interesting, because if we're looking at a product of a late medieval forger, then they used to depict the wounds, the crucifixion wounds, through the hands rather than through the wrists. Driving a nail through the wrist rather than the hand would fix the body to the cross. It would also sever the median nerve, causing the thumbs to turn inward, and we can see no thumbs are visible on either hand. There are also blood stains from wounds inflicted on the heel, again consistent with a Roman crucifixion and the biblical depiction of Christ's death on the cross. So the injuries sustained by the man on the shroud correspond to the biblical accounts of the torture and crucifixion of Christ, which is obviously why the shroud is such an object of fascination around the world. I got to see it myself in 2010. I traveled to Turin, and these are photographs that I took, and it was huge crowds, as you might imagine, to go outside. It's not put on public display very often, so it's considered to be a sort of a once in a generational thing. And I think since 2010, I think it's only been on display, I think, once since then. So these were photographs that I took of it, and it is an astonishing. I mean, I can't describe it. To actually be that close to something is incredible, and you actually see a lot more detail than you would expect to see. It's a curious. The image is quite curious. The closer you are to it, the less you tend to see. But when you step back and when you look at it in its entirety, the image is very, very clear and very apparent even now after all this time. So jumping into the history, in 250 AD, we have a written history of Edessa. Now, Edessa is a town. Today it's called Samlerhuset, and it's in Turkey. And Edessa records that a cloth with an image of Christ supernaturally imprinted upon the linen was given to King Akbar in the 1st century by Christ's disciples. King Akbar is believed to have been one of the first kings to embrace Christianity, and so it would make sense for what would have been at that time a very, very valuable artifact to the early Christian community. It makes sense for them to want to entrust its protection to the first king to embrace Christianity. However, when the king died, the city reverted to paganism, and the cloth was hidden away to protect it, and soon its whereabouts were forgotten. It slipped into legend very quickly. And then in 525 AD, something quite incredible happened. They were repairing the city walls after a flood, and the cloth was unexpectedly discovered, hidden in a niche. And amidst great rejoicing, pilgrims and artists travelled to the city to see what was described as the true face of Christ, an image not made by human hands. And the image of Edessa became known as the Mandylion. And one contemporary account describes the mysterious image as, quote, a moist secretion with no paint or artistic craft transferred with no artistic intervention onto the cloth, which is a very good description of what we have today. So after its rediscovery, there was a consensus that was quickly established on Jesus's image, and it very quickly emerged, and he began to be increasingly depicted with the same iconic features from the 6th century onwards. And you can sort of see there's a couple of examples there. There's the Basilica at Ravenna in Italy, which was completed around 526 AD. And then you can also see St. Catherine's Monastery in Mount Sinai in Egypt, also dated to the 6th century. So a long distance apart, and yet a surprisingly similar image. They've also recently discovered an ancient mosaic in Edessa as well, which, as I said, today is called Sanilurfa in Turkey. You can see where it is on the map there. And
Justin,
as I shall show you, I'm sorry, did somebody?
Justin, I was to the Blue Mosque a number of years ago, and there's a beautiful mosaic there. I don't remember when that one particular was dated. I didn't look it up. Do you know which one? You don't have the image there, but it's very similar to the Basilica in Rome.
Yes, yes. Well, I think there was this consensus. I don't know exactly when that particular image was created, but certainly from the 6th century onwards. I mean, if you before the 6th century, depictions of Christ varied quite considerably. In some he was clean shaven, in others he had curly hair. Nobody had arrived at a real consensus for what Christ would have looked like. Of course, as we know, the Bible doesn't really give us a lot of information about how he would have looked. And so, but we certainly see, as I said, around about the time of the rediscovery of the Mandylion, suddenly there's this explosion of this long-haired, bearded, large owl-like eyes, long nose. This becomes effectively the standard depiction, which and few vary from that from onwards. So moving on. As I said, in 943, oh yes, I'm sorry, the image did appear on some coins, as I mentioned earlier, the first coins of Justinian II. They actually depicted, again, this striking sort of bearded image of Christ. In 943 AD, an army from the Byzantine Empire came to Edessa, which was now under Islamic rule, and the city leaders there agreed to exchange their famous cloth for 200 high-ranking Muslim prisoners. And so the Mandylion made a triumphal entry into Constantinople on August the 15th, 944 AD. I love how this ancient manuscript has actually depicted the Mandylion with a very human face, sort of almost rising up out of the cloth as somebody kisses it. But we see then the Mandylion arriving in Constantinople. It was considered to be too holy to be put on public display, but we do have some wonderful descriptions from dignitaries who were able to see it. One of them was the Archbishop in Constantinople, Gregory Referendarius, and he was particularly struck with blood and water, sweat and image. He delivered a sermon on the day celebrating the arrival of the Mandylion, and he talks about blood and water, sweat and image. In 1130 AD, an English monk, Vitalis, wrote a history of the church in which he described the cloth as displaying the form and size of the Lord's body supernaturally transferred. So this is what they were looking at, as I said, in Constantinople. And this is where my little coin sort of comes into the story, because about 26 years after the Mandylion of Edessa had arrived with such celebration into Constantinople, Byzantine Emperor John I Tzimiskis made a decision that for his circulating coins, his bronze circulating coins, rather than depicting his image, he wanted it to depict the image of Christ. And I think that this decision might have had something to do with the fact that he wanted to basically celebrate throughout the empire and say, look what we've got. You know, this is now in our possession. The Mandylion is incredibly holy. It's Christ's own image, supernaturally transferred, and it's now in our possession. And I think that may have been part of his decision to want to put it on coins so that everybody got to see it. And although the cloth at the time was too holy, considered too holy to be on public display all the time, one can only assume that the emperor wanted a very good likeness of Christ on his coins. And I think it's highly likely that he granted his coin engraver a very special viewing of the Mandylion so he could produce an accurate likeness of the Holy Face. And certainly, I think he did a phenomenal job, as I'm hoping I can show you in a moment. So this is the coin. The actual coin is right here in my hands right now, and there it is. It's very, very small, as you can see. You won't see any detail, but you can see it on the screen. It's about 25 millimeters, so about 2.5 centimeters. And the image of the face, therefore, is little more than a centimeter in size. So it's incredibly small. You can actually see around the face is the inscription, God with us. Which again is a rather nice nod, I think, to the fact that they were celebrating the fact that the Holy Mandylion was in their possession. And on the reverse, leaving no room at all for doubt as to whose face is depicted on it, it actually displays Jesus Christ, King of Kings. So this was struck, as I said, between 969 and 976 AD. The other point I'd like to just mention as well, because I think it's worth remembering what we're looking at here, and that is what we actually see on the coin is actually a mirror image of what the artist would have actually sculpted. Because the way that coins were struck, obviously at that time, the image would have been, both the front and back would have been carved, engraved into a die. The metal, the coin metal would have been, the blank would have been then slightly heated and placed between the two dies, and then struck very sharply with a hammer to obviously impress the coin image onto it. The circulating coins were struck very quickly and in very large numbers. The die engraver would not have had the time to craft an intricate and detailed portrait of the face. And so I believe he did something for which we can be very grateful for. He actually copied the lines that actually make up the image. And I'll show you what I mean in a couple of moments. But in order to actually see exactly what the engraver engraved onto the die, you simply flip the image that appears on the struck coin. So as you can see, the coin as it looks is the one at the bottom left. If you flip it over, you can actually see what the engraver actually engraved. And if you compare it to the face that appears on the Shroud of Turin, you begin to see some quite astonishing similarities, which I don't think could possibly be there by chance. I think one of the most striking on this particular coin is a very distinctive cross-shaped incorporating the eyebrows, forehead, and nose. We see it very clearly on the Shroud of Turin, but we also see it on this little Byzantine coin as well. And you can see how the cross is sort of made up and comprised. You also have another telling feature, which I think is very interesting, that the eyes appear to be closed. They're closed on the cloth. They also the engraver has also made an attempt, I think, to show that they're closed on the coin. Now that again is a very, very interesting characteristic, because if you wanted to depict the Son of God, Christ on a coin, the Savior of the world, you would depict him with his eyes open unless you had a reason not to. And I think that our coin engraver was attempting to replicate as carefully as he could the image that was seen on the Mandylion. You can also see obviously a small square underneath the moustache, again, which has been copied over. And bearing in mind our engraver is working on a coin die no bigger than a centimetre to create this image. So he's done a phenomenal job of trying to incorporate as much detail as he can in. You can also see evidence of injury to the cheek, which again appears on both the cloth and on the coin. You can see the forked beard, a slightly forked beard there as well. You can also see two distinct strands of hair that are running in parallel on the left-hand side. And again, the hair marries up as well. The other point as well there, just to show as well, is he's even managed to depict the slightly sloping moustache as well. There's if you look, the moustache actually slopes downwards slightly. And again, our engraver has actually managed to replicate that as well. So I think he's done an extraordinary job there. And one of the things that I wanted to do, just to sort of see how accurate it is, I superimposed the two images together. And as you can see, with both faces overlaid, you can see how striking he has attempted to replicate it. Now, again, you have to consider that the face on the coin is only 10 millimeters in length, about a centimeter. I think there's a lot of information here which cannot be dismissed as pure coincidence. When the carbon-14 test result was announced in 1988, it was claimed that the shroud was faked up 3 to 4 centuries after this coin was produced, which I think does demonstrate a serious flaw in the carbon dating. I can go and speak about. Yes, of course. Hello.
I had a question. What kind of numbers are we talking about for the coin in circulation that are in existence today? Even.
Yeah. Well, we have a good. I mean, my example is a good example of the face. The difficulty that we have with Byzantine coins, particularly anonymous coins, the anonymous folles circulated and were struck for about 100 or so years, and we've got plenty of examples. I mean, you can go to any sort of coin dealers or any sort of auction website, and you can find examples, good examples of the anonymous folles. The difficulty is, because these coins would have circulated for decades, they are obviously, many of the surviving examples are quite badly worn, and very sadly, the area that would have worn the quickest would be the area showing the face, because the face would have been slightly raised because of the way it's struck, and so the detail on the face would be what would be the first to go. And very often you can look at, you can buy examples of the anonymous bronze folles, and you can discover that the face is almost a perfect oval, where all the facial details have been lost over time through constant use. What makes this particular coin, I think, quite special is because it still retains a lot of detail. It may have ended up, being lost quicker, so it may not have. I don't think it would have circulated as long as some of the others, because it still retains quite a lot of its detail. But they would have been very prevalent because they would have circulated throughout the Byzantine Empire, and as I said, these would have been mass-produced coins. These would have been coins that would have been in and out of everybody's pockets and purses. This would have been the economy of the society. So they would have been widespread, and they would have been seen sort of everywhere.
Right. So
I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, my question sort of is connected to the 1988 announcement. Some, playing the devil's advocate here, some may argue that, oh, this coin is so available that, some forger got his hands on one and then, forged it in some way. But that was what I was sort of getting at. And
yeah, I think that there's been a lot of study. I mean, taking out the shroud element, obviously the Byzantine coins are well known. They've been well documented in the past and catalogued. We know that this coin was struck around 969 AD. That is a given. Now, if you wanted to make the point that, and I have heard it said, somebody said, "Oh, this is why when they faked the Shroud of Turin, they copied the known images of Christ that were around at that time." Hey, you're asking which effectively came first. I think that the attention to detail that was paid on actually replicating this image as closely as possible is a very, very strong indicator that the coins came first. I'm sorry, the shroud came first. They were copying something. As I said, you would not depict the Lord of Life, the Savior of the world, with his eyes closed, unless you had a very good reason to do so. And I believe that the most logical conclusion for me is that these coins were being copied. They had a template. They were actually copying something, and that something was the Mandylion, this holy image, this image not made by human hands that they had in their possession. I mean, it's also worth mentioning, obviously, that when they did the carbon testing in 1988, they obviously had no the museums that actually the universities, I'm sorry, that actually participated in the test were not looking as to how the image was formed. They were simply just doing a straightforward testing of the material, and it was a great pity. I mean, we can go into the details for that later as to how badly skewed those results were. We now know, because we've had access to through Freedom of Information Act, we've had access to the data that they had, and we can see that they should never have actually announced a result, because the three laboratories that were taking part had produced such wildly differing results that clearly there was something going on. That there was something going on there. The sample actually that was cut from the corner of the cloth actually got older as it progressed into the cloth, which was picked up by the universities. The other point that they had discovered, of course, which we now know, is that they had at some point during the Middle Ages they had repaired it. They cut the sample that they used for the carbon dating was actually cut from the corner of the cloth, and it was a corner that the priests would have held up often for hours at a time during public expositions. And basically what happened there is that over time this thin cloth would have become quite badly worn and probably frayed, and a very expert level repair was conducted in the Middle Ages, where it was actually strengthened with cotton. And there is no cotton anywhere else in the body of the cloth. The cloth is linen, but the cotton is what had skewed the results and made them appear older than they were. We've done non-invasive testing since then, which actually points to a more of a 1st century origin. And there's other information that's been found on the cloth, and I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here. One of the things that most interested in me is the side seam that was actually cut from the cloth to wind around the body while the body was actually lying in the shroud. Was then reattached to the shroud afterwards, and you can actually see it if you look at an image of the shroud. You can actually see this very faint line just running along the top of the shroud, running along the top, and that's the side strip which was expertly stitched back onto the body of the cloth. Now, what's interesting is we didn't see until relatively recently, when we took the backing cloth off, the medieval backing cloth that had been sewn on, we actually saw this incredible seam that actually expertly has reattached this side strip. Textile experts have examined it and have said basically that there's only one place where this particular weaving or this particular seam has been seen before, and that was actually in the 1st century Masada, which was a Jewish community, and obviously in the 1st century. So again, this is something else which just demonstrates that this cannot be a medieval forgery, and this is something that comes from the 1st century and is absolutely consistent with what we know. So yes, I can go off on tangents left, right, and centre, but I mean that's a very interesting sort of, again, nod to its authenticity.
Yeah, Justin, we were excavating the Qumran cave in K53, 2017, and Dr. Reynold Price and myself. And a couple of years later, we did another cave just above us, and they found some linen inside the cave.
Yes,
and I've got a photograph of that in my new
fantastic.
book. But the weave on that, and it was actually white. It was bleached white.
Yes,
and that the Qumran community would have used with the Essene. So
yes.
pretty fascinating how they could do the special kind of weaving and textiles, in the 1st century.
No, absolutely, and I think they've identified the unique herringbone twill which appears on the shroud. I think they've now been able to ascertain that would most likely have come from Egypt, and would have been incredibly expensive. But of course, the Bible doesn't tell us a huge amount about Joseph of Arimathea, but does tell us that he was a wealthy man, so was obviously able to afford the best. But yes, it's a fascinating field of study. This is the 2nd coin. I have 2 Byzantine anonymous folles. This one was struck a little bit later. Here I'm holding it in my hand here again. Oh, I'm just trying to get it so that you can see the size of it more than anything else. It's in this little disc here. And this is a bronze folles. It's a little bit larger. It's about 30 millimeters. Struck during the reign, probably of Romanos or Michael IV, between 1028 and 1041, so a little bit later. Again, the same inscription on the reverse, Jesus Christ, King of Kings, and another depiction of Christ, which again, you hold it up to an image of the shroud, you have some extraordinary similarities. So let me show you what I mean. Once again, you can see eyes that appear very much to be closed, again consistent with what we see on the image of the shroud. There's also this very interesting, unusual shape in the middle of the forehead, exactly where a bloodstain appears on the Shroud of Turin. Again, cannot be a coincidence. I think that's extraordinary. Again, long hair that appears to be bunched at the shoulders. You also have this moustache, which appears to be sloping down on the left side. Once again, these are details which I think show that the engraver was copying, in this case, the image on the shroud. And this is a fascinating point as well. There's even a horizontal band across the throat. Now this is also very telling. It appears on the shroud. It most likely would have been a chin strap or something just to stop the mouth from dropping open as the body was laid out in death. As I said, you can see the mark. You can see this horizontal band on the shroud, and the coin artist has replicated it as well in exactly the same position on the coin. So again, I think what we're looking at here is quite compelling evidence. Just a couple of slides here, just one of them just showing you here how the Mandylion would have looked at that time. It was, they believe, presented very much so that you could see the face. I think there may have been a move away from displaying the full body. And one of the reasons for that is because the actual shroud, as we know, is very heavily bloodstained. grave clothes would have been a big problem for people at that time, and having something that was so heavily bloodstained and would have, I think, would have been very difficult. And I think what they've done is they've displayed and presented the Mandylion in such a way as to just display the face only. And what is very interesting is that the artistic depictions that we have of the Mandylion suggest that it was displayed in a wide rectangular frame with a hole cut in the center to display the face. And it has been suggested that the unusually wide frame could have been used to conceal the much longer cloth folded within it. And certainly, if you fold the shroud in the way that it's shown below, you actually end up with a large sort of landscape, if you like, image with the cloth with the face in the center, perfect, ready for display. And that certainly seems to be how it was displayed. We know that at some point while it was in Constantinople, the frame was opened and the full cloth was opened up, because excuse me, we do have these the Archbishop, for example, that actually describing blood and water, sweat and image. He was actually looking at water stains and also blood on the cloth as well. So we know that that it was opened up at some point, and actually sort of the full body image was made clear. It's also very interesting as well that that they've examined the fold marks that actually were still to be seen on the shroud. And they replicate exactly how the shroud would have been folded in order for it to have actually been displayed as the Mandylion was. So the creases on the Shroud of Turin show that it was once kept folded in exactly that way, which obviously adds further credibility to the suggestion that the Mandylion and the Shroud of Turin are actually one and the same historical artifact. So I think that my little coin actually does a lot to demonstrate that that the Mandylion and what we call the Shroud of Turin today are actually the same historical artifact. So so again, just running through there, just briefly summarizing it. There are the two coins. We can see eyes that appear to be closed. We can see a distinctive cross incorporating the eyebrows, forehead, and nose. We see a small square underneath the moustache, evidence of an injury to the cheek, the forked beard, two strands of hair running in parallel, exactly as they do on the shroud. On the later coin, we again see the eyes that appear to be closed. We see this unusual shape in the middle of the forehead corresponding to a blood stain on the shroud. We see long hair that appears to be bunched at the shoulders. We see the moustache that appears to be sloping down. And we have this incredible horizontal band across the throat in exactly the same way that the shroud has. So, so a very compelling case for authenticity, I think.
Well done display, the presentation.
Good.
Yeah, really good.
Hey, John, do you want to take us into the other room? And
Sure.
And,
Justin, I just left for a minute. You know, I have that original book on the shroud with the paper cover on it and everything. And I went to my library and I couldn't find it. That's why it was gone. Because when you showed up your first image, I said, hey, I bought that book too.
Yes,
you know? And it was even torn a little bit with the covering. You know, they did a reprint, and I also had that reprint that they did on it. But I couldn't.
No, I think that's the fancy book, isn't it? I think you've got there, which is the yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's one of the new ones. I think Ian Wilson has produced several different books on the shroud, which building on his original research. They're highly recommend them. I mean they are extraordinary. I mean the last one that he produced in 2010 on the shroud is amazing. He's a regular contributor as well to the British Shroud of Turin Society newsletter, and some of his new research is quite groundbreaking. So
I'll need to subscribe to that.
Recommended.
You know, I would remember reading one thing, and then I'll get over here to the shroud. That they that there was like polymers that were on some of the clothing when they did even some later attempted testing. They were testing really the polymer rather than the thread itself. That, you know, kind of like I was telling George, like patina that occurs on some of our other archaeological, you know, copper and bronze things. you know.
I think there was a lot, unfortunately, that went wrong with the carbon dating, and I think that even people who were involved in it will recognise that. I mean, the couple that made me that stopped the original plan was to test samples from around the cloth. That all went out the window. They ended up cutting just one little strip from the corner. They picked probably the worst, well, no, definitely the worst area that they could have picked, because this was the area that had been held up by the priests for years. So what we now know about carbon-14 is, of course, is that if there is any contamination from sweat or from bodily fluids or from exposure to the elements or from fire, from water, all of these things can skew the result. And of course, the shroud has been subjected in its life to all of those things. It's been set on fire. It's had water on it.
Yeah.
It's been held up for priests for hours at a time. And of course, we also now know as well that it was repaired, and that they did a very expert job in the Middle Ages, but it was repaired. So unfortunately, they picked absolutely the worst sample they could have tested. And then, unfortunately, in their rush to judgment, they actually abandoned all of the protocols that they should have, they'd actually agreed on in the past to ensure that there would be transparency. So they all talked to each other, they all conferred, and what we now know is that they should never have released the results that they did, because there was such a disparity between the different university results that they should have rejected the whole thing out of hand. I was always very interested in 1988 when they announced the results. Somebody was asked, Sir Edmund Hall, who ran the carbon-14 laboratory in Oxford, was asked how the image came to be formed on it. And he actually said, and I'm slightly paraphrasing, but he said there was a big market for forgeries. Somebody went out, got a bit of linen, faked it up and flogged it. And I think that demonstrates such a lack of scientific curiosity. You could not imagine it. I mean, the one thing that we know is, as I said, this image cannot be replicated even with 21st century technology. So the idea of somebody going out, getting a bit of linen, faking it up and flogging it is absolutely ridiculous. And so
so much for his scientific method.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think that tells you everything you need to know. Absolutely.
Okay. Well,
John?
Yeah.
Did you just get back from Italy? Had you been over there?
Yeah, I actually own olive groves there, and I produce olive oil.
Oh, wow.
So I always spend time in Rome while I'm there, and I go to the normal places, and then I go and try to explore a new cathedral every time, because underneath it's been built on, Roman ruins, and so I just got back. But I, just like Justin, I mean, I was introduced to the shroud really early on, and I purchased that book, the same one he showed, and I went off to my library trying to find it, and I just couldn't find it right now because it's a mess. But I met a guy who he's from South America. He's an advocate of the shroud also, and he was able to photographically reproduce the shroud in a photograph form in its original size. And just like Justin was saying, I measured mine, and it's right at 14 feet, plus or minus a little bit more. So the other thing too, which we had mentioned earlier, originally I'm from Pennsylvania, and then I moved out west. I spent a number of years on the Navajo Indian Reservation, and then I moved into Albuquerque. And just south of that, north of us is Santa Fe, and then of course Los Alamos. And actually, my son is a software engineer that works for Los Alamos today. But in those original individuals that were involved, in particular, the one that generates that 3D image, because of the light.
The VP8.
Yeah, the light. I was from Los Alamos. And here I find myself years later, just my son actually working in the same, facility where some of those people that did that original research were from. So it's kind of cool. Let me go ahead and just flip around. A lot of times people have no idea how big this thing really is, and once I got it, and I was familiar with its length, but not until you fold that bugger out do you have a real sense for how large it is. So let me go ahead and do this reverse real quick. Okay, so to give you an idea, I have 3 folding tables that I had to put out so that I could lay it out. Now I have both images. I have the original, the cloth underneath is the way that Justin, the way it appears, and this is the negative one. But the negative, again, is easier to see, so I have it here. So again, just getting an idea, I'll just kind of walk down it, as you can see, as you go, and then we'll come back and zero in. Hey, I wanted to ask Justin, which you said on the top, I had never heard that before, that it had been cut, and that's the one that may have been wrapped around the body.
Yes, so there's a side seam. If I go back to my presentation and go back to the first image, let me just see if I can find.
Let me ask you, where would that be? Would that be what I'm calling top of the shroud and the bottom? Where would that have been?
So the side strip in this image here, if I can just call that up.
Yes.
So if you see, if you can have a look here, it's in this image here, it's running along the bottom. Now you can see that they've taken away a strip, and you can just about make out a very faint line that runs all the way the full length of the shroud.
The full length of it?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay.
So it would have been 14. It would have been 14 feet long.
Is it on the side where that was cut out as a sample?
Yeah.
Oh.
Just if you bear with me.
No. I do see the seam.
Can you see it? Can you see it? Yes.
Oh, here.
It's a very faint line. It's a very thin line, and it's if you go up right up.
Yeah. See,
that's right.
There it is.
And this would have been cut. This would have been cut from the main cloth.
Sure.
And it would have been used as it was laid over the body. It would have been used to wrap then around the body to sort of wrap it into the shroud. Afterwards,
you see the seam?
Yeah,
you can see the seam right there. I never noticed that before.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Hello.
Could you unshare your screen, and then we'll get the full screen of John,
Sorry.
and he can point that out to us on the
just
on the
bear
negative
with
one.
Yes, of course. Let me just go back into stop share. There we are. How's that? Sorry.
Okay, that's good. Now, John, you can show us what that where the line is.
Okay, well, here's the piece, of course, that was cut off when they did the original testing. But as Justin explained,
yes, there it is. There you can see the start of it there.
You can see it. You're right. I can't believe it runs the entire length of it. Sheesh. When you kept saying side, I was like, what side's he talking about?
Yes.
There it is. The whole length of it. Wow.
And it runs the whole
you're
length.
Right. When we go in really close, you can see the stitching. See?
Well, you see, there's more of it on the other side, but of course, it was very expertly designed so that you didn't see it. It was very, very thin on the one side. The stitching then is on the back, and of course, it wasn't until we actually removed the medieval backing cloth from the shroud that we could actually see what was how that seam had been stitched. And it's extraordinary because again, it's a first century Jewish stitch, which has not been seen since the first century. So it's
that's fascinating too.
Yeah,
that's really fascinating. Just getting a feel for it again, its length, and then of course coming back down the image, and then of course getting to the image of the face here.
Yeah, that's it.
So here,
and it is extraordinary to think whose face we might be looking at there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and then just like you said, the different. Yeah, I mean that coin that you've found there. I'm a coin collector too, and I certainly would like to get one, even if it's defaced somewhat. But wow, absolutely fascinating. So at some point, we're going to be opening our museum. We have really rare items that we've attempted to collect, and a lot of great coins too. And we'll have to have conversations with them. I have a Ptolemais Philadelphia's coin, tetragold drachma, that's a great coin for, justifying the historical authenticity of the transferring of the text and stuff, and, that. But anyways, there you go. One more time.
Great. Amazing, John. Thank you for sharing that.
No,
Pretty
great.
special.
Sure.
That is cool. That is cool.
You have you back, and you could go into more
Oh,
detail
yes.
on some of
Oh,
these
This
yeah,
is
of
items.
wonderful.
We had some more questions. It's
Oh,
a
definitely.
great introduction. I've written a number of books. I've got 40 of them on archaeology, but I've stayed away from the shroud because there's so much material on it, and I just felt I wasn't an expert enough to be able to give any kind of a judgment. But this fascination with the imaging is really something, and I think that you're bang on as far as I could tell. And
Oh, thank
you
you.
know, from a professional,
Yes.
field archaeologist, and I think that it's got a lot to offer. So really appreciate
Ah.
your presentation and your willingness to come and share that with our audience.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. Very
Oh,
welcome.
thank you very much. That was great. That was fantastic.
It was a great
Um,
presentation.
John, is that the light shroud underneath? Is that the positive image? Is that what that
Yes,
one
it
was?
is. I have both of them. And just like Justin says, when you're close, it's hard to see, but the farther you get away from it, you're able to see it considerably better.
I should be able to see it because, John, I'm at least, 5-10 miles away from you.
And just for everyone to know, just you're in the UK somewhere.
I am. That's right. Yes, I'm in Cardiff in Wales.
In Cardiff.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm in Canada, and George and John, they're in Albuquerque. So we've got an international
A
team
very
today.
international flavor to today. No, absolutely.
That's great.
That's good.
Well,
Great
thanks, everyone.
presentation, Justin. Wow, that was great.
Oh, thank you. That's good.
I really
Well, like I
appreciate
said,
it.
I have a much larger one. So if you'd like me to come back sometime, I'd be happy to look at that.
Well, just as
Justin,
soon as we close down, we'll get on it.
you'll share
No,
your
we're going to
links.
have you back because this was really a good presentation. It flowed well with your PowerPoint. Well done. Well done,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank
Yes.
you. Oh,
Justin,
you're
you
very
can share
welcome.
your links with me, and then we'll share them in the podcast for the audience.
Definitely.
I
Yeah.
want the public to know. Perhaps the link to the newsletters and so forth.
Yes, well, the British Shroud of Turin Society, I think, as Dr. Sparks said earlier, is now, we have a new website which came out earlier this year, which is shroudofturin.uk, and what we've tried to do there is to put a lot of material onto there to sort of help somebody who's maybe approaching the shroud for the first time and just wants to get an understanding of what they're looking at. So we go into a lot of detail. There's a history section there. So we sort of speculate, and of course we trace back some of the earliest references to this unusual cloth not made by human hands, and so and we go right through the history that we know of the shroud, and then there's also scientific evidence. There's also an examination of the carbon-14 testing. There's a news section, so any news that's coming out. So there's plenty to see there. So I would recommend, as I said, anybody with an interest to subscribe to the newsletter. It comes out usually twice a year. It's very informative. We have people writing from all over the world, and it's a very good way to sort of keep up to date with all of the new research that's coming out. And we also have, I'm starting to sound like I'm plugging, but we also have it's celebrating the 50th anniversary of the British Shroud of Turin Society next year. And so in April, we're going to actually have a special conference as well, which will be held in Blackburn Cathedral. And so again, everybody is welcome to come along and attend. We'll have some good speakers. I believe Ian Wilson will be there. That's certainly the hope. He lives in Australia now, but I think he's going to make a special visit to the UK to celebrate that. So it should be a very interesting weekend that we're going to have there.
Oh,
Great.
50 years. Wow.
Well, George, you want to take us out?
Yes. Well, great presentation. Love to have you with us again, sir.
Oh, most definitely. Thank you.
Well, but you'll pay attention to your emails because I'm going to be knocking on your door again pretty soon. Everybody out there, thank you for participating. We are about 220,000 subscribers. Thank you to the listening audience. This is Biblical Archaeology from the ground down. Everybody have a nice day. Thank you very much.